You know what? Hi there. So I'm a music theory grad student, and last month I defended my dissertation proposal, which is kind of a big milestone in my PhD work. Not only am I now officially a Master of Philosophy, it also means that I finished the MA and all the classes and exams part of my PhD, and now I'm just going to be teaching and working on this big project that I'm about to describe for the next 3 years. I thought I'd do a little video about what this project will be because it has a lot to do with the channel, both past and future. Basically, I'm doing a bunch of things about tactus transformations in metal, which is my umbrella term for moments when the tactus, and you'll never guess this, transforms. If you've been watching these videos, you've probably heard me talk about tactus. It's a word I like for the rate that we feel as the beat in music. If you say, what's the tempo of that song? You're probably asking what rate the tactus is going at. I use tactus because other more familiar words like beat and tempo, which I just used to define it, are actually a little hazy. Beat, for example, can refer to like different drum patterns as well as what I'm calling the tactus, and not all tactus transformations that I'm going to talk about necessarily involve changes of tempo. It's probably impossible to give a completely rigorous way of defining what the tactus of a given piece of music is, partly because it's sometimes ambiguous, but there are a few things that will almost always work. My favorite way of defining it is as the rate at which you move to music if you're moving periodically. So if you're doing a repetitive motion like tapping your foot or headbanging along with the music, though overt movement is probably not actually necessary to feeling a tactus. Though I certainly feel like in my own experience, even when I don't think I'm moving something if I'm paying attention to rhythm at all. In metal, the tactus is also very often associated with isochronous cymbal hits. So repeating hits on what we call a timekeeping cymbal that are equally spaced in time. Though, again, these definitely aren't necessary for hearing a tactus, and even when they're there, we don't necessarily align our feeling of tactus with the cymbal directly. In almost all popular music, a song will have a clear tactus that doesn't change at all for the whole course of the song, even if the way it's presented does change, i.e. with a different drum beat or whatever. This is not the case in metal. Moments where the tactus changes in some way, which I call tactus transformations, happen a lot in metal, and they're pretty striking when they do. They force you to change how you're moving to the music, they often make me want to move more, and they raise a lot of cool music theory issues. I'll start by talking through my 5 flavors of tactus transformation in order of increasing radicalness or potential for disruption, with some examples, and then after that I'll talk about what the dissertation project will do to explore them. First and least disruptive are gradual tactus transformations. These almost always go in the direction of getting slower in metal, like in Ithyphallic. But sometimes things also get faster, like in Limerent Death. And sometimes they go in both directions within a single section, as happens at a more subtle level in a lot of Wind Hands music. Simple enough and not too disruptive because we can get dragged along with the tempo change as it happens. Next are these things I'm calling tactus resets, which are when you have a steady beat, but suddenly one of the beats comes earlier than it should. This happens, for example, in that Sic Satyr song that I talked about in an earlier video. and in one of the tracks from the Ad Nauseam album from earlier this year. In tactus resets, we've got a steady tactus, but there's a momentary hiccup that can be pretty disorienting. Next are what I'm calling pivot value tempo changes, which include the whole gamut of things normally called tempo modulations. So these are things like the straight up tempo modulation I talked about in my video about Wormed, where the dotted eighth note becomes the new quarter note. And those things that I call pulse-preserving tactus modulations, like the pretty straightforward ones at the start of Lights Out. These force you to suddenly navigate to a new tempo, but I'm saying they're made a little easier because the new tempo is based on a value that was already doing something in the music. There's some pivot that helps bridge the old and new tempos. Next are direct tempo changes, moments where the tempo changes instantaneously without any reference to a duration that was already in the music. These happen almost constantly in classic death metal albums from the late 80s and early 90s. Here's an example from Suffocation, where there are two riffs at different unrelated tempos that alternate back and forth with each other. But it's by no means something that only happens in old school death metal. Just to pick something from the most recent thing I worked on, there are a bunch of these in the chorus of From the Dust of This Planet. In direct tempo changes, the whole band just jumps to a new tempo as a group, which can be pretty disruptive in a really cool way. Finally, there are moments where we go from music without a clear tactus to music with a clear tactus, or vice versa, which I call tactus genesis and tactus dissolution, respectively. Sumac does both a lot, like in Image of Control, where the spacey, tactusless opening kind of condensates into the heavy, sludgy first riff. And the Dillinger Escape Plan do some really cool versions of the opposite, where they go from something chaotic and on the grid to something even more chaotic and off the grid, like in that section of Prancer that I've been obsessing over since my undergrad thesis. So those are the 5 flavors of tactus transformation that I'll be talking about. And the first chapter of the dissertation will be mostly about outlining these and going into the music theory weeds about why they're unusual, the different ways they work, how they relate to subgenre classification, and why many of them present kind of fundamental ambiguities and awkwardnesses for the standard notation system. But that's just the start of the dissertation and the part that I've got most of the draft done for already. The rest of the project will be trying to expand beyond dry traditional music theory, which of course is cool but limited, by cross-examining tactus transformations from 3 different angles. Broadly speaking, these are culture, performance, and movement. The second chapter will look at cultural meanings arising from these tactus transformations. For this, I'll be reading what people who care about this music say about it. I know most people won't specifically mention tactus transformations, but I think there's a lot of stuff that people say in album reviews, on forums, and comment sections, etc., that talks about these moments and what they mean indirectly. Please keep me in your prayers because I will probably be combing through a lot of YouTube comment sections next year, which I feel like is the academic equivalent to working in an environment with toxic fumes from solvents or whatever. As a side note, I want to take this moment to say thank you to all of you for making the comment sections on my videos unusually interesting and positive, and writing a lot of things that are fun for me to read and I often learn from. Though as a side note within a side note, yes, believe it or not, I have heard of ulcerate and I will do a video about them eventually. Tactus transformations generally make music harder to write and play, and this second chapter of the dissertation, the cultural chapter, will basically ask why bands bother with them. What cultural and aesthetic motivations do they have for writing and playing them? I have a lot of thoughts about this, but I won't go into details here because another exciting aspect of this chapter is that in addition to reading what people write about this music, I'll also be interviewing fans on my own, which may include people watching this video, and I don't want to insert my own ideas into the conversation too directly. The third chapter will look at performance. As I just said, tactus transformations are generally hard to play, and a cool complement to the super analytical music theory stuff in the first chapter will be to look at what bands say about how they write and learn this music. I'll be looking at published interviews and live footage when I can, but most of my work on this will come in the form of doing my own interviews and hopefully sitting in on rehearsals when possible. And the kind of corpus of examples that I spend a lot of time on in the rest of the dissertation will at least partly be decided by what bands I have access to for my research in this chapter. I expect to find all sorts of interesting stuff about how bands use different strategies and technologies to write and play complicated, precisely synchronized music with tactus transformations. This might include everything from using standard notation, doing magic tricks with MIDI, writing strings of numbers on paper, playing or learning from click tracks, describing their music in ways that seem to contradict a music theory understanding or my transcription. The list goes on. I'm not exactly sure of the details of what I'll find with this, and largely for that reason, this is one of the parts I'm most excited about. I think especially this idea of bands playing off-the-grid stuff really precisely together is super interesting and not something that people have really talked about in music theory that deals with performance. In general, the perspectives of performers tend to get minimized in the music theory literature, and this is especially true in the small field of metal studies. I'm hoping to start bringing the really specialized technical knowledge of people who are in these bands into the discussion. And finally, the fourth and last chapter will take an empirical look at movement to this music. My dream scenario is that I'll have some people wear accelerometers while they mosh at an actual concert and be able to see when and how their head and hand movements line up with what I hear as the tactus, see what happens around tactus transformations, and see if there are moments when how people in the audience seem to be hearing something is different from how the band seems to hear it, among many other things. This will be the most logistically complicated part of this project and won't happen until late 2022 at the earliest, but I'm really excited for this too. I think it has the potential to either contradict or put a much finer point on some of the ideas that I've had for a long time. And as far as I know, it's unprecedented in studying metal. So that will be my main academic focus for the next 3 years or so, or I guess by the time I'm making this, it's like 2.5 more years. If you've been following this channel, you know I've had an obsession with tempo from the start. I've become a real tempo modulation junkie in my old age. And that's all leading up to this dissertation proposal that I defended. And a lot of the videos I have already made and will continue to make are kind of me workshopping examples and forcing myself to write about them in a more disciplined way. So that's going to keep happening. And as kind of a side note, I'm really hoping that I'm going to be able to incorporate video diagrams, kind of like I do in these videos, into the actual dissertation, with the hope that it'll maybe be a little more fun and more accessible than a traditional PhD dissertation. But I'm also going to be continuing to use this channel as an outlet for other stuff about metal that I find interesting, but doesn't fit into my dissertation at all. So don't worry, I'll still have stuff about harmony, form, meter, and all of the other fun non-tempo stuff too. And with that, I'm going to take a break from posting for a little bit, probably just a few weeks. I've gotten through all the videos I wrote and filmed last summer, and I think it works best if I take a few weeks to just write and film as much as I can in between semesters, and then spread out the tedious process of editing all these videos throughout the semester. Thank you as always for your support. Keep transforming your cacti, and I will see you sometime in January.